Welcome, and thanks for joining me on the Ultimate 180 podcast. If you have ever felt exhausted, overwhelmed, or trapped in your own life and wish you were able to have a complete life makeover, then you are in the perfect place to learn how to pull an Ultimate 180 and change your life beyond all expectations. I'm your host, Kristina Walker, and today I will be revealing a major secret when it comes to longevity. It seems like everywhere you turn these days, people are discussing studies, habits, blue zones, and all the good and many times conflicting advice when it comes to living longer. Even the science of longevity seems to lack a solid path for the masses when it comes to how to extend our lives here on Earth. But there is one thing that I know is absolutely vital when it comes to longevity, and I cannot wait to share it with you today. So before we dive in, I just want to ask you a real quick favor. If this episode at all sparks something inside you, whether it's hope, inspiration, or maybe just a little nudge to think differently, please take a split second to hit that follow button on your podcast app. It not only helps you stay connected to more life-changing insights, but you will also be helping this podcast reach more people who may need a little help changing their lives too. So let's get started as we navigate change together, 1 degree at a time. Let's do this. Longevity seems like such a buzzword these days. If you've ever dove into the rabbit hole of figuring out all the things that are supposed to help us humans survive longer, you'll probably end up completely overwhelmed. You'll also probably walk away with a major to-do list on all the things you need to change in your life. And of course, you may be super confused because it seems like there is way too much information out there, and much of it is conflicting. And honestly, it can be so super frustrating if you're trying to find that one thing to focus on that has been proven to extend our lifespan. And it often feels like the more studies that come out, the more the advice starts with the phrase, well, it depends on your genetics, where you live, what's your ancestry, how you handle stress, what you eat, what you don't eat, and all of these other dependent factors that each of us individuals will inevitably have our own completely unique makeup. Which is why it's so hard to pinpoint any hard and fast rules about living longer, because we are all so unique in our lifestyles, especially when it comes to diet and exercise. And because there's always some study about some guy that's just sitting around smoking and drinking whiskey well into his hundreds. So then you might be wondering, well, then how do I know the secret about longevity if even the scientists can't agree on one thing? It's because my secret embraces the uniqueness of the individual, the uniqueness of you. Longevity starts in our mind. It starts with what your definition is of what you think your life will look like, what you believe it will look like at a certain age. Even if you haven't thought about it very much, you have beliefs about it. Have you ever heard family members state facts about your genetics? Like, oh, all the women on your dad's side of the family live into their 90s. Wow, really? That's awesome. And if you're a woman, you might take this fact and lodge it into your brain somewhere that says, cool, women in my family live into their 90s. And that means I will too. And that just sits there and it shapes the way you see the world. And it gives you a strong belief deep down inside that you will live a long life. Now, we know there is absolutely no guarantee, but this deep-rooted belief affects everything. Just like, let's go on the flip side for a minute. Let's say you're a guy and you're told growing up, oh, all the men in our family only live into their 60s because they have heart disease. I mean, what does that do to your expectations, right? How does that set up your belief system? From the time you were little, you've heard this, and whether you really understood it or not, you took it in. And it is deeply rooted somewhere there inside you in your brain, and that has set your belief system from the time you were born. All of those things. And our expectations and our beliefs create our reality. So naturally, when you take actions in your daily life, they align with and support what you believe in. It's just human nature, it's how it works, right? So, what happens when you believe all of these things? That sets in motion from the very beginning, the very deepest part of you, of your beliefs about your specific longevity. So just think, if you are this guy who has been told his whole life that men in his 60s die of heart disease, and he says, well, then I better research what longevity means and what helps longevity. And he says, okay, I'm going to decide I'm going to start running. Understand that now he is going to be running as a man that believes that he gets heart disease in his 60s. What does that mean? What does that tell you? So he's already started out thinking, I am going to get heart disease and I'm going to run to try and help it. That's very different than someone that's thinking, you know what? People in my family live a really long time. What do they do? What are some healthy things we can do to support that? That's a very different thing. That's a very different way that your body is going to respond to all the things that you actually do to support it. I hope that makes sense. So you have to start with the beliefs and say, what specifically do I want? When I say, I think of myself in the future, whether it's 80s, 90s, hundreds, whatever it is, what do you believe could be true for you? What is it? What do you want? Let's talk about that first. What do you want? Not everybody wants to live to be 120. I do. I really do. But there's a specific way I want to live when I'm 120. I don't want to be 120 sitting in a home somewhere and not being able to move. That's not how I want my 120s. But what is it that you, despite what you've been told, your whole life, what do you want? And you need to get real specific. So let me give you an example. So I've heard before when people are asked, what do you want in your old age? And I hear somebody sweetly say, well, you know what? I want to live to see my grandchildren and my great grandchildren. Okay, that's good. I mean, that's a good start, right? But what the hell does that mean? Because think about it. I mean, if you had your kids early and they had their kids early and they could have their kids early, you could literally be in your 60s and have great grandchildren, right? But you might be meaning, well, I want to be like 80, 90 years old and with my grandchildren. And what's the difference? The first example, I want to live to see my great grandchildren. Okay. Well, that could mean that you are sitting in a hospital bed and somebody plops that baby on your lap and says, see, look at there, say hi, right? That's seeing your great grandchildren. Is that what you want? Because if you're not specific, that might be what you get. I mean, there is no guarantee. That might be what anybody gets. But you have a better chance of living a long life the way you want it if you define it and you start believing that that's real for you. So take that example, right? Okay, I don't want to just be sitting in a hospital, somebody plopping my grandbaby on my lap. That's not really what I want. What I envision is in my 90s that I'm playing with my grandkids, that I'm taking them to the park, that I'm traveling around the world with them, that I'm doing fun things. And this is what I want to be doing with my life in my 90s. I want to be stable. I want to be doing yoga. I want to be doing all the things. I want to be active. What is it that you want? And it's not the same for everybody. And that's why it's so unique. When we talk about longevity being unique for everybody, we all have a unique starting point on top of everything else, on top of genetics, on top of where we live, on top of how we handle everything and eat and all of that, right? Everything starts inside. It starts with your belief system. So do you understand the example that I gave you? The difference? The difference between somebody who just says, I want to see something at an arbitrary age. It's very different than being really specific and saying, this is how I see myself. And you really have to start believing it. And honestly, having some thought about it is better than none. Because if you have none, then you are stuck with all the beliefs that were fed to you from the time that you were born, that are just sitting in there somewhere. So for you to even just think about, wow, what would be fun? What would be great? How would it be if I lived, another 50 years and I was always on top of technology and I was always this, that, the other? How would that feel? That would be awesome, right? How does that feel for you? What does that feel like? What does it look like to you? And to really take some time. This is so important. If you're going to spend any time researching longevity, then definitely I recommend spending the time changing your beliefs about what it means to you and how that could look. Because again, there is no guarantee of how long you're going to live. Things happen, right? But your odds increase dramatically when you believe and expect something out of life. When you expect the most out of life, you most likely are going to get there. If you truly believe it, you'll get there. But it starts with you. And I think I'm going to do a whole nother podcast on this, but you got to be careful of the ifs. The ifs will kill a dream like no other. If you say, "Oh, I want to live until pretend I'm the guy again with this in the 60s, right? Where he's supposed to get heart disease." So if he starts to say, "Well, I really want to be in my 80s and I want to be, fixing cars or playing golf or whatever it is," unless same thing as if I don't have heart disease and if I can make some changes and if I don't end up like my family. Don't use those unless and ifs. Get them out of your vocabulary because they will literally, those beliefs are still in there. Every time you give it an unless or an if, that belief, that in deep grown from the time you're born belief, that is still inside you. It's when you decide that you don't want to believe that anymore is when you can let that go. So be careful of those ifs. So the number one thing that you can do to change your longevity is to really spend some time with it. Spend time changing your belief system about what is possible for you. It will do more than anything you can possibly just start doing. It will have more impact, absolutely more impact, and it will help when you start doing those things to help you live longer because they will match and align with your beliefs and your daily activities will support that. So I want to thank you so much for joining me. Please remember, hit that follow button. And if you'd like more information on how to incorporate these tips into your Ultimate 180 experience, join my VIP group on ultimate180.com and let's discover what's ultimately possible for you. You can catch all my episodes there and always on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you listen to your shows.